Today, I'll talk about 2 steps to conquer an estrangement, that being grit and grace. Those are 2 key components when you find yourself navigating an estranged relationship. Often, these 2 attributes come later in the estrangement when you've suffered through many negative emotions. What if you could learn the biblical principles of grit and grace early on and shorten the cycle of emotional pain? Would you be willing to sit with God and allow Him to change your perspective? Grit is the constant irritation that creates friction in the relationship. Grace comes alongside and softens the painful open wound that begins the process of healing. Join me today as I talk about the grit and grace of estranged relationships. Find the full transcript for this episode, plus resources for women, at Estrangement, Turning Pain into Peace at beckykolb.com/57. You're listening to Estrangement, Turning Pain into Peace, a podcast and free resource for women with estranged relationships, created by me, host and coach Becky Kolb. My superpower is to help you turn your emotional pain into peace by conquering guilt and shame, rebuilding self-confidence, and developing healthy boundaries. I've dealt with estranged relationships most of my life and know both the pain and the peace. Subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss a thing. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Grit and grace are described beautifully in the formation of a beautiful pearl. My husband gave me a pearl necklace one year, and it's one of my favorite gifts. Another dear friend recently made a pearl bracelet when I relocated to Texas. The bracelet contains 14 pearls, one representing each of our grandchildren. Needless to say, the pearl has become a symbol for me. Are you familiar with the story of how a pearl is formed? It's fascinating. Beginning with the oyster, an irritant intrusively enters the shell. A grain of sand or a parasite enters through a slight opening, and there it begins. As the oyster begins to cover the irritating grit with its soft tissue, it softens, creating less pain. The oyster continues to cover this grit with calcium carbonate and conchion, creating layer upon layer over a period of 2 to 4 years as it forms a pearl. Can you see the correlation between your estranged loved one and the grit that has entered the oyster? Now, I don't know how all of this happens undersea, but I can imagine that the oyster didn't want the grit to enter. Or conversely, the oyster made an unknown opening, never considering the possibility of an unwanted intrusion. Either way, grit has entered your relationship and is now creating a rub against your life. Abandonment, rejection, feelings of unworthiness, guilt, shame, and all the negative emotions that irritate your soul. You want to spit out the grit, right? But that's not possible. The shell has closed and you're left to deal with the irritation. Honestly, it doesn't really matter how the grit entered your life. You caused it, or you have no idea how it occurred. It's there. And you aren't happy about it, and you really don't want to deal with it. You just want it to go away or stop causing pain. Well, I've been there. And just like the pearl isn't formed overnight, most likely neither will your relationship heal quickly. Once someone has chosen to walk away, it takes time, and unfortunately, many never reconcile. Those that have chosen to enter the long, arduous process and engage in the softening process. That's called grace, and many just simply choose to walk away. Therefore, pride is often a deterrent in the beginning of layering the irritant in estrangement. After all, who wants to extend grace to someone who has rejected you, who may have falsely accused you of something, who continues to judge you, who walked away as a child and never explained why? Consider the beautiful pearl, once an irritant and now a beautiful stone. If the pearl had rejected the grit, it would have remained in the oyster anyway, creating pain until the oyster died or somehow was forcibly opened and expelled. My friend, you can allow the grit to remain in you for as long as you choose. Resentment, anger, and bitterness will continue, and it will harden you. Guilt will keep you hardened, prohibiting the soft layer from softening your own heart. Unforgiveness locks you in with the irritant, with nowhere to go. Constant rubbing of the grit against your heart may cause unmitigated and irreversible damage. But you have control here. True, you may not have had any control over the grit entering your life. It was unwanted, and you want it to go away, but it's there. Consider the oyster again. Grit has entered the shell, causing irritation. A defense mechanism kicks in as the oyster begins layering its soft tissue around the grit. Soon the pain is lessened as sharp edges are covered. Imagine a small grain entering an oyster. How can such a tiny grain cause so much irritation? The layering begins covering the minuscule substance. Moreover, it continues to do so for 2 to 4 years. Can you see the pearl forming as layer after layer of grace covers the hardened, unwanted grit? To the pearl, layering is a biological response to the irritant. To you and me, it's unnatural to offer grace to someone who has hurt us. Someone who has abandoned and rejected us doesn't deserve grace. That's a natural human response, but one that doesn't produce a pearl. As one who harbored resentment and bitterness, I can attest to the fact that grit of unwanted rejection will never go away unless you begin to layer it with grace. Here are some steps that I discovered that will help you move toward layering in your relationship. First, consider a distinct perspective. Ask God to allow you to see the estranged loved one with His eyes. That enabled me to discover things going on in their life that I either didn't know or had locked away. This perspective can help soften your heart toward the grit. Second, own your part. Rarely is estrangement solely the fault of one person. You may or may not know what you've done, but ask God to show you from His perspective. Participating in a spiritual gifts inventory once showed me that my strengths could also be a weakness. For example, the gift of leadership could also create a tendency to become bossy or critical. When you consider your part in the conflict, ask God to show you areas where He may need to come alongside you, layering you with His grace. Third, forgive. Sometimes it isn't possible to do this one-on-one with the estranged person, as they may not allow it. But work through this process with God. It's essential before you can begin to layer the grit and grace. Listen to my podcast on the process of forgiveness at beckykolb.com/33. Fourth, and this is really important, reflect on the grace that God has extended to you. Scripture says to forgive as you have been forgiven, and to love as you've been loved. When you think about how God has forgiven and loved you, how can you not obey that command? I ask the question because it's one that I struggled with for a long time. We don't feel they deserve love and forgiveness, but did you? Did I? Let that permeate your heart. Grit and grace are the attributes that work in your heart when you're estranged from a loved one, and you have no control over the reconciliation of that relationship, but you do have control over your heart and the grace you offer. What if they're unapproachable and you can't offer tangible grace to them? My friend, layering grace in a estranged relationship begins in your heart. Work through each of the steps I mentioned. As you consider an unfamiliar perspective, your heart will begin to soften. Moreover, you own your part. Confess it to God. He'll forgive you, and you can forgive yourself, ending any guilt or shame. More soft tissue forming in your heart. When you aren't clear on your part, ask God to show you areas in your character or personality that may be an irritant to others. Ask Him to help soften and correct those things so that you can offer more grace to those around you. Forgiveness is the best thing you can do to set your heart free and get into a place where you can begin to layer grace around those that have hurt you. It may take time. It will take time. Remember, the oyster took 2 to 4 years to layer the grit. Finally, reflect on God's forgiveness to you. Someone told me once that they could understand why I needed God so much in my life, because I had sinned with my divorce and all that surrounded that. This person had not experienced that and therefore didn't feel the need for God so much. I laugh about that now, though it hurt at the time. Scripture says all have sinned and fallen short of God's standard of perfection. No one can say they haven't sinned. And furthermore, Scripture doesn't classify one sin as greater than any other, except for blasphemy. Take some time and reflect on sin in your life. Where have you been forgiven? And give Him praise for the forgiveness He layered upon you in His grace. What irritant has entered the shell of your life? Are you seeking relief from the constant rubbing against you? Will you consider layering grace around it, one layer at a time? You have complete control over how you respond to hurtful words and actions of others. You can remain hardened and angry, or you can begin today to layer a bit of grace around that relationship, even if it's just between you and God for now. It may feel unnatural, but keep layering. Take the steps I've offered and work through those every day. One step may take weeks or months. Don't rush. Remember the 2 to 4 years and give yourself grace as you work through this. Working through your own painful issues may become evident. It's hard to extend grace to others when you haven't given it to yourself. As a child of God, He's covered you with His grace. Accept it and begin to layer it with your loved one. He'll give you the strength and make the unnatural seem natural. And remember, I'm here for you if you feel the need for a little coaching to get you started. Reach out to me at beckycold.com/contact and mention Grit and Grace. I'm offering one free coaching session to the first 2 that respond. And until next time, I pray for God's grace to cover you and your estranged loved one. Thanks for listening to Estrangement, Turning Pain into Peace. Estrangement is a difficult topic for many, and I applaud you for tuning in. Don't forget to check out earlier episodes too. And please share this with others who may need to hear. And if you're getting value, I would appreciate a short review.